So, here we're going to talk about the Persian Empire as we conclude this group of people and finish out the chapter. As we talk about the Persians, one of the greatest leaders that they had was Cyrus the Great. And he began forming his empire after the Assyrians fell, somewhere around 612 BC. And as he was early on in his leadership, he encountered a group of people known as the Lydians. Now, the Lydians were led by a ruler. His name was Croesus, and his people fought against the Persians, and Croesus rallied an army to try to stop Cyrus the Great from taking over so much territory and from becoming so powerful, but he was unsuccessful. Now, the Lydians were famous for their natural resources and especially their use of coins. They're one of the first civilizations that effectively uses coins for the exchange of goods. And so this is one of their claims to fame and one of their key ideas. And many other cultures are going to follow after by printing their own coins, or I shouldn't say printing, maybe stamping their own coins, and using them in exchange for goods. Now, one of the unique things about Cyrus was the fact that he was merciful to the people he conquered. And instead of trying to get them to obey his rules and laws by force, he decided it was a better approach to try to befriend them and show them mercy, show them kindness, and in return, he was hoping that the people would show loyalty. And for the most part, it was successful, and it really worked out well for Cyrus. So, Persia did have a lot of interaction with the nation of Israel. God used Cyrus to help free the people of Israel from captivity, especially from Babylon, and as well as some other groups of people that had taken in part of the diaspora and had put them into bondage. And so as Cyrus came through, he conquered the other countries, which effectively meant that he now had ownership rights to many of the Hebrews. And because of his nature to be more merciful, he often gave them their freedom or allowed them a lot of freedom within his kingdom. And we see that through a number of Bible characters. Of Esther is one of them. Now, she was in the Persian Empire, not necessarily under the rule of Cyrus the Great, but we can see through her story how she was able to go to the king, and the king here at this time was willing to listen to her and ultimately preserve the Hebrew people from annihilation in that plot that was against them. It was also the Persians that allowed Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And this is under their leadership where not only Cyrus, but many of the other leaders in the Persian Empire also did the same thing, where they gave a lot of mercy and a lot of freedom to the people that were under their control. And as you read through the book of Nehemiah, he goes to the king, and the king not only gives him permission to go rebuild the walls, but also provides for him many of the supplies to rebuild the walls in there. He also, the Persians also give permission and actually encourage the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Now, the way that the Persians governed was that they instituted something called satrapies. These are like provinces, or maybe you think of them like states. And each of the satrapies had a satrap or a governor that was in charge of that region. And it's most likely that it's some of these governors that we would have encountered in Scripture with the story of Nehemiah as well as Esther. And these governors, they had people that were in charge of monitoring the citizens, and they were called the king's eyes. Now, these people, they were like a secret police. And they would go around and somewhat spy for the king and or for the governor, and they would report back and tell him these people are doing right or these people are not doing right, and that would allow him to keep an eye on people without having a full military force that was constantly threatening the people. The Persians also built the Royal Road. This is an intricate network of roads that ran throughout their empire, and their empire was large. And so the primary purpose of these roads was for travel and to make communication so much more effective within the empire. And I know, as for most of you that study history and you know about the Roman roads, that's typically the one that many people think about as being some of the best roads that the world had seen up to that point. The Persians were just a little bit ahead of their time, and while their roads were not quite as good as the Roman roads, they were a good predecessor to it. There's some question as to whether they had a postal service. The Persians seemed to develop a mail service similar to that what we would think of as the Pony Express, and part of the reason we think that comes through the story of Esther, where it seems as though the king is using this type of system to send out letters to protect the Jews from Haman's plot to kill all the Jews. And so uh, we're not sure exactly what that looked like, but it seems as though they had something along those lines. When it comes to Persian culture, most of their culture was borrowed from other people because of the way in which the Persians governed by allowing the people a lot of freedom. They did not overtake previous cultures that were there. Instead, they just merged them together. And that brings along with it a number of religious ideas. The main religion of the Persians was Zoroastrianism, and this was named after their religious leader Zoroaster, and they focused their religion on the writings found in the Avesta. This is their most sacred religious writings that told them how to worship and the way to live their life. The main god here of Zoroastrianism is Ahura Mazda, and the main teachings was that there are opposing forces in the world, that there's a battleground between those two opposing forces of good versus evil. And so at the end of life, if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, then you would be rewarded. If not, then you'd be punished. Now, the golden age of the Persians was under the leadership of Darius the Great, and he continued to hold power in Persia until the time of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, as we mentioned with the previous, I think it was back with now I can't remember. One of the other civilizations we had talked about. Oh, I think it was the Phoenicians, perhaps. But Alexander the Great is going to be the one who comes back to conquer a lot of these other civilizations. And the Bible prophesies about that. In fact, we go here to Daniel chapter 2. This is a visual image of the dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2. And he had this dream that he couldn't interpret. None of his people could interpret, but Daniel is given the interpretation by God. And so let me read for you a little bit out of this to help you see some of the Bible prophecy that fits along with history. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 31, he says, "You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue is made of gold, its breasts and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue and its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, and the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were crushed all the same time and became like chaff in the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." And so here is the interpretation of that dream. "So this is the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of man dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold." You see that on the picture there. "After you, there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you, and then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the earth." So the next kingdom is the Persian Empire, and that is the silver portion of the body. And then the Greek Empire is going to come as the bronze part of this statue. And then we get to Rome. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So the iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break these in pieces. That you saw the feet, in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes and the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. And this is talking, the iron and clay are some of the modern powers that come and go in more modern history. In the days of those kings of God, kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and will put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain with the hands, and it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. And I think this visual just really helps interpret that passage and helps us to see a little bit of what God is trying to lay out for the people and prophesy to the future. And of course, Daniel didn't know about the Greeks or even the Persians, the Romans, and certainly not any of the modern powers. But we can look back on history, we can attribute those characteristics to those particular kingdoms and see what God was prophesying about the future of the world.